From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Andrew says, "Hello, conspiracy friends. First and foremost, I love all the Stuff podcast. It's much like Johnny Five reading all the books. More input. So thank you for filling my ears and brain with intelligent and well-researched material." Ah, shucks. You know, Matt, just whenever we get a letter that starts off this way, I wonder if they're buttering us up for something. You know what I mean?
Most assuredly, Andrew. We see you. We see what you're doing.
Well, let's see where this rabbit hole goes. Andrew says, "I'm writing today as a response to the microwave weapons listener mail and how we could possibly be surrounded by these devices, even if it's not the intention right now. I even exposed myself to this while hiking the Appalachian Trail around 5 years ago. If you're not aware," says Andrew, "many railroads and other industrial communications use microwave point-to-point comms. In simple terms, they're using communication devices with a point-to-point relay system, with microwaves being the data-carrying medium. Much like cellular uses 4G, LTE, 5G digital frequency ranges, and of course 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi signals we're familiar with by now. So, they have these tight spotlight beams that send or receive communication. Normally, they're attached to radio towers or high cliff areas where there's no interference with the ground or trees. They're also used to communicate between Earth and satellites in space." Here's where he starts bringing this together. He's saying, "I'm guessing companies can make and use these devices aren't considering them as weapons to point at people, but they could cause the same issues as weaponized microwave devices." And, you know, Matt, I don't know if you're up for it, but do you want to give us a dramatic reading of Andrew's personal experience there in the Appalachians?
Andrew says, "As I was enjoying a hike through the Appalachian Mountains on the world-famous trail, I found a wonderful cliff spot to sit and have lunch, overlooking a vast forest, watching a couple of eagles fly around searching for their own meal. I started to feel very odd and hot. While I did notice the giant microwave dish pointed directly at me with many warning signs posted, I didn't quite understand the technology like I do today. While I've spent a majority of my life as an audio engineer, microwave frequencies weren't quite in my mind until I spent a little too much time on the cliffside. By now, I'm sure you and my fellow listeners are rolling your eyes and screaming, 'You moron!' I don't think we are, Andrew, but let's continue. After my lunch, I felt really sick. I was only there for 10 to 15 minutes, and I had one of the worst headaches I've ever experienced, and I used to suffer from terrible sinus issues. My body ached more than usual, and it took the rest of the day to start feeling normal again. While hiking the trail, it's quite common to be sick and exhausted because you're lucky to take in half the calories you're spending while adventuring on to the next camping spot. As far as I can tell, there hasn't been any long-term effects from this exposure, but I haven't sought testing of this either. I just thought this was an interesting idea and a little story from my personal experiences."
Mm-hmm. And Andrew goes on to say, "While I don't agree with much of the 5G conspiracies or other frequency-type weapons, I do understand that we are constantly surrounded and bombarded by different energies and frequencies. Light frequencies we can see, sound frequencies we can hear and sometimes feel. Who knows where our evolution will go with our world completely surrounded by energy of all frequencies? After all, vibes are frequencies we feel from the world around us. When will that just be a trick to our brains, if it isn't already?" And Andrew, you go on to say, "I'll have to send in another with my ideas of Amazon starting their own currency, much like in Mr. Robot." So thank you so much, Andrew. There are a couple of points here that this sent me on a bit of a rabbit hole for. First, this letter is odd because earlier, completely unrelated, I was writing a dystopian sci-fi story about let's not get sued, about a company very much like Amazon with a ruler very much like Jeff, and we just call him Jeff on this show. And one of the big plot points in this story was starting one's own currency, because much like coal companies, made famous in that song 16 Tons, corporations benefit by creating scrip and paying in scrip. It's not as crazy, nor is it as distant a possibility as it may seem.
I mean, companies like the United States of America did it.
Hey, there we go. Somebody's been listening to our classic episodes. What was that line from Is Taxation Legal? When people or tax activists would go to court and say, I take that at value, or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh, it's in there somewhere. But yeah, I'd have to go back and jumpstart all that stuff. That is a cavernous thing, the tax activists, and just the things that they're able to argue in court.
That's what court's for,
Yeah, but for me, I'm just, okay.
So there's another piece here, which is this. How much radiation or how many energy waves of one sort or another are you exposed to every day? Let's assume that you're not going through an X-ray system of some sort. Let's assume that you're not like me and my ill-fated friends trying to build microwave weapons in junkyard tractor trailers. You're not eating a bunch of bananas, which also have radiation. What's the average dose? We've got an answer. According to the National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements, the average annual radiation dose per person in the U.S. is 6.2 millirem. And you can see a pretty good breakdown on EPA.gov of where all this stuff comes from. I know it's not quite the same as being inundated with some other type of energy, but I think it's important to know. I think you raise a good point, Andrew. Invisible things move about and through us. It's just scientifically, it's a fact. Also, I am going to pretend that when you said vibes, you were referring to the Jeff Goldblum, Cyndi Lauper film Vibes, which is just tremendous. I'll have Matt, have I mentioned Vibes to you before?
Yeah, we had a conversation about Vibes.
Do you want me to stop mentioning Vibes? Is this the okay?
Well,
leave
it's too late now. It's too late.
I'm sorry.
Now people are gonna look it up.
Yes. Oh, be that agent of chaos. But Matt, I wanted to ask you about this because we've talked about this in the past before. What's your take on concerns about radiation and what we're exposed to our day-to-day lives? I remember specifically our earlier listener mail conversation regarding where one should store their phone, right?
Oh, yeah.
Pants pocket, you sleep with it by your head, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that was a whole conversation about it not being smart to be in your pocket, especially if you're worried about viability to procreate at some point. No matter what you're, working with down there, your organs, your soft tissue organs are not, it's not good to irradiate them a lot with your cellular devices, which they do put out radiation. And just so you know, that is a thing. That is a known thing. Whether or not it's enough to truly harm you is right now a bit up in the air. But I would recommend against it. We had several people write in about this. One caller, do you remember for his job, he climbs up cell and radio towers.
Yep.
And he told us that story about being exposed to 5G and 4G and all these other different things, like very close to the actual dishes where the energy is being like sent out. And he said the only time that he ever felt truly sick was by an FM radio signal, and the frequencies coming out of an FM signal. That isn't to say that Andrew didn't experience something real. There were warning signs around the dish that he was near. He experienced something real. I don't know how often that happens and how dangerous it could be for just a passerby or someone in a city. We talked about the rumors surrounding 5G technology and some of the scientific papers that were looking at possibilities behind the tech. As of right now, I'm a little weirded out by it because mostly it has to do with frequency ranges. When you're speaking about 5G, that's something that we broke down in a different episode. It's just the megahertz at which the signals are being sent, the frequencies at which they're being sent and read, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's correct. And it's also, it's a matter of degree. It's also a matter of proximity, right? So what we're talking about are RF, radio frequency, intensities. It is true, exposure to high RF levels can cause tissue damage in humans because your body can not physically cope with or dissipate all the excessive heat that can be generated. You know what I mean? It's like a computer that has a couple of heat sinks. It doesn't grow more when it gets hot.
There you go. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
So, Andrew, we're going to pause for a moment for a word from our sponsors, but stay tuned because we're returning and we're not leaving your letter behind just yet. We have one more thing that we think might surprise you.
Vibes. Go and watch it today.